Hello, and welcome to Stories from India. This is a podcast where we talk about myths, legends, and folk tales from India. I am your host, Narad Muni, and am a mythological character myself. I have the gift of eternal life and knowledge of the past, the present, and the future. By profession, I'm a traveling musician and a storyteller. So the way I'm doing my job is by podcast. In this episode, we are going to do a folk tale from Bengal about devotion and faith. The faith of a schoolboy and his mother in someone who appears to be an ordinary cowherd at first. But soon, it becomes apparent that he's much more than that. The story starts with a family living in a village. It included a farmer and his wife and their baby boy Gopal. The farmer was a hard-working man, but often in poor health. His wife, Mamta, was hard-working as well, but not on the farm. Her talents lay in the kitchen and in work in the house, of which there was a substantial amount. Mamta was also a devotee of Vishnu, and Krishna in particular. That made her my favorite kind of person. In case you don't know, I'm a pretty big fan of Vishnu myself. But even though I am president for life of Vishnu's fan club, I wasn't going to try to enroll her in a monthly subscription in this club. Mamta and her family were extremely poor. So we at the fan club sent them the monthly goodies box for free. It included a magazine, stickers, flags, and a cap, and a little flute that Gopal loved the sound of. It's almost a fact of these stories that usually when there's a poor in money but rich in happiness family, there's a tragedy waiting to happen. This case was no different. Gopal's father passed away. Mamta was devastated, understandably so. Not just because her husband had passed away, but because she was worried for her son. As things stood, Mamta could manage basic things in the house, but she could not work on the farm. And without that, there was little hope of earning enough to feed herself and Gopal. It's not that she didn't want to learn farm work. If forced into it, she certainly would have. But who would take care of her baby during this time? That's when the other villagers stepped in, proving again that it really does take a village to raise a child. Many villagers offered to manage an extra portion of what was now Mamta's farm. It would be no extra work for them, they said. They had the plows, the seeders, they usually also had extra fertilizer. They had harvesters, threshers, and extra space in their bullock carts for when it was time to sell the crop. The only thing they did not have was the extra space in their banks to keep the money the crop would earn. Mamta was overcome with emotion at their generosity. She accepted their kindness because it would help Gopal. For her part, she did little things to help the villagers. She would cook food and offer packed lunches for the farmers. She would sew clothes for them. It was hardly enough, and it consumed some of her own limited groceries. But the villagers found a way to turn this into her favor by insisting on paying her for the lunches and the clothes. Things went on like this for a while. Gopal grew up to be a fine boy, well-mannered and polite, always willing to lend a helping hand. He wasn't yet tall enough to rescue cats stuck in trees, but he did other acts of kindness, including helping the elderly cross the street, which wasn't such a big deal because there wasn't much traffic in medieval Indian village roads. But the elderly liked to indulge the boy, and then tipped him well enough, even though he tried to refuse. When he was 5 or 6, Gopal's mom began to realize that he was of school-going age. And she realized it was important to have an education, to be successful in those days and age. So she made up her mind. Gopal would be going to school that year. First, she had to prepare because even in medieval India, there was a fair bit of school prep that was needed. The notebooks and pencils and slate weren't a problem. Those were derived from nature. So she collected a few leaves and stitched them together into notebooks. And the sand on the ground would substitute for a slate or a chalkboard. What Mamta needed to work on was the school uniform. She also needed to make 2 outfits at least, so Gopal wouldn't have to repeat the same clothes every day. Mamta could wash one outfit while he was at school wearing the other. She managed to get some cotton from here and there and began sewing Gopal's clothes. By now, she was an expert, and Gopal's uniform came out perfectly. Gopal was a bit hesitant to go to school all by himself. You see, the school was in a neighboring village, and the path there went through a dark forest. There were no kindergarten-age kids in Gopal's own village. That meant he had to go alone. Mamta had a lot of work to do to pay back the loan she had taken out to buy the cotton. She couldn't afford to spend any time going the very long way to the school and back, and again in the village to pick him up. Moving to the village with the school was not possible. Back in those days, property prices near great schools were pretty high, just as it is today. Dropping off and picking up Gopal every day was not sustainable, and sooner or later Gopal would have to walk to school alone. The way she explained it, it was better to rip off the band-aid now than to slowly get him accustomed to the idea of going alone through the forest. So the 6-year-old boy walked all by himself through a dark forest on his way to school. The forest was dark, and Gopal was scared. But there was light here and there. It was mid-morning, and the sun was out, so it wasn't all that dark. Besides, Gopal knew, from a chance glance through a used copy of the India Geographic magazine, that wild animals typically hunted in the night, not during the day. But apparently, the wild animals in the forest hadn't read that same magazine, because as he went deeper along the path through the forest, Gopal heard a growl. The tone was very menacing, but Gopal did not scream. He ran, and when he heard some motion behind him, he ran faster. Luckily for him, he was very close to the edge of the forest at that point, and burst into a clearing. And right there was the entrance to his new school. Now, you might expect that someone who had just escaped the jaws of death might have raised it to any of the staff at their school. Maybe the staff would then contact the parents or find a way to arrange safe passage back home in the evening. But this was medieval India, you know. What do you expect? The teaching staff consisted of one person, the teacher, or guru, as I shall call him. And the guru had no idea where the children were from. He was happy to teach any child who showed up without even bothering to ask them which village they were from. All day, they spent working on basic math, basic Sanskrit, and some science lessons. Gopal loved it. He enjoyed all the lessons and he enjoyed time spent with his new friends. This was the best day of his life. Except it wasn't. The morning walk through the forest had been scary enough, but now it was getting dark. He couldn't not go back home. This village, with the school, was full of strangers. Not all strangers, but most of them. Anyway, it would be too impolite to try to stay the night with his new friends. So he plucked up the courage and set foot into the forest that at this time of evening had definitely gotten much darker. Gopal heard the crickets, but he couldn't see anything. Nearby, something slithered and then rubbed against his foot. He dashed forward through the path that he remembered. Every minute or two, there was a little break in the canopy. Thankfully, because then Gopal knew that he was on the right track. Somehow, he made it home. Even though he heard lots more growling and howling. So the India Geographic magazine was largely correct after all. When he finally got home, Gopal rushed in and hugged his mother tight. Mamta was delighted to see her child, but she thought he was overcome with emotion because he had missed her all day. The boy slept soundly that night. The next morning, when she woke him up, Gopal said that he didn't want to go to school. That was puzzling because it seemed to her he had enjoyed his lessons. Gopal admitted sheepishly that he was afraid. Very, very afraid of the dark forest. Mamta was a quick thinker. First, she acknowledged his courage in being able to admit that he was afraid. I know that sounds contradictory, but it's two different kinds of courage. She added that the dark forest wasn't really a problem though. All Gopal had to do was to call out to his brother. Gopal was shocked. He didn't know he had a brother. Mamta said that he did. And indeed, his brother's name was Gopal too. She said that he lived in the forest and that he would escort Gopal all the way to school. Gopal wondered why his mom hadn't mentioned this yesterday. But the answer was that she didn't know he would be afraid. The forest was something that adults just took for granted. This flippant attitude towards real dangers might help explain the high rate of child mortality in medieval India. Trusting his mom, Gopal stepped into the forest. At the very first suspicious sound, Gopal called out to his brother. Now, if you thought Mamta had just provided a placebo that would soon be revealed as a bad trick to play on a 6-year-old, you were wrong. Out of the bushes stepped a boy. Not much older than Gopal. He was dark in complexion, had a peacock feather in his hair, and carried a flute. He was a boy who looked divine. That was the right word for him. Gopal couldn't quite place him, but there was something very familiar about this boy, who was also named Gopal. To eliminate some confusion, I will refer to the Gopal from the forest as the cowherd, because that's what the cowherd said he was herding: cows. Gopal didn't actually see the cows, but there were some vague background noises that convinced him that they were there somewhere. That also gave Gopal new confidence. If those cows could graze peacefully in this forest, it meant there wasn't as much of a threat from wild animals after all. Or if there was, those wild animals were likely going to attack the cows first. Why chase a tiny little boy when the beasts could hunt cows? The cowherd walked with Gopal to the edge of the forest, and Gopal thanked his brother. A whole day of fun learning later, Gopal again called out to the cowherd, who accompanied him across the forest again. This went on for several days, and Gopal's fear of the forest was practically gone. He still called on the cowherd, though, because he loved his brother's company, and the cowherd responded just as enthusiastically. The school year progressed well, and Gopal was doing really well, excelling in all his studies. But when things were going well again, there was a new problem. You see, Teacher's Day was coming up. Now it's important to know that the guru who was teaching them at school wasn't getting paid. There was no concept of tuition fees. There was Guru Dakshina, but that was a slightly different thing. Mostly, the entire village would chip in and help the teacher by giving them grains from their fields, or they would fetch water from the well. It was a barter system, and teachers were usually content with it. Teacher's Day was a day to honor and celebrate the Guru, and it was part of tradition for every child to bring a gift. Gopal heard all that his classmates were planning to bring. One of them was bringing the Guru a new writing device called a pen, whatever that was. It was all the rage in other parts of the world. Another child was getting the Guru first-class seats to the next village Gilli Danda match, complete with lie-flat seats and in-game meal service. Gopal was a little overwhelmed hearing all this, and Mamta was too when he told her that evening. They couldn't afford anything. What gift could they give Gopal's teacher? Mamta wondered why Gopal hadn't asked his brother. He came back home with him after school, didn't he? And Gopal practically discussed everything with the cowherd. At this point, you might have realized that Mamta didn't just think that the cowherd was Gopal's imaginary friend. Gopal responded to Mamta's question by saying that he wasn't sure if he should have brought it up. He didn't want to ask for a handout. But Mamta convinced her boy that it was okay because the cowherd was his brother after all. Gopal called on the cowherd as usual the next morning on the way to school. The schoolboy then explained that it was Teacher's Day and asked for the cowherd's help to get his Guru a present. The cowherd looked skeptical. "How can I help? I'm just a poor cowherd," he said. Gopal looked crestfallen, so the cowherd asked him to wait. He went into the forest and came back with a little pot. The cowherd said that this was a little dahi he had. Dahi is curd, kind of like yogurt, but not exactly. Gopal was happy and took it to his school. Amongst all the other elaborate gifts, this little single serve pot of dahi looked modest to Gopal's eyes, to those of his teacher, and everyone else. But no one said anything. During lunch that day, the Guru decided to try the dahi. It was just a bite, but let's see how it tastes, he thought. As he served himself the dahi, he noticed something odd. He could not empty the little container. He kept scooping out dahi, but the container was always full. There was enough dahi to feed the whole class, and maybe even the whole village. The Guru could not understand it. He had just taught the boys basic physics, and conservation of matter was an important element of the lesson he had just taught. It might seem to you that it was possible to pack too much into objects like auto rickshaws, as a recent news article showed, or into the TARDIS from the Doctor Who TV series. But the Guru was a man of science. He knew that the TARDIS is fictional and that even auto rickshaws have a limit on how many people you can squeeze in. The pot was bigger on the inside and he couldn't figure out why. He summoned Gopal and asked about the pot of dahi. Gopal told him the whole story truthfully. But the Guru did not believe him. A dark complexioned boy with a peacock feather and with a flute in his hand? Did Gopal have any mental health issues? The Guru asked in a not very sensitive way. Finally, Gopal volunteered to introduce the Guru to the cowherd. The two set off into the forest, which made the rest of the class very happy because that meant afternoon classes were dismissed. Gopal called out to the cowherd, but he did not appear. The Guru was snarling triumphantly, and Gopal was on the verge of tears. That's when a voice was heard from the forest. It wasn't coming from any particular direction. It was all around, which made the Guru wonder how come the forest had surround sound. Maybe he could stage movie nights here for his class. The voice was that of the cowherd. It said that he only appeared to those who were pure of heart. In short, Gopal was, and the Guru was not. At this point, the Guru realized finally that he was hearing the voice of Krishna himself. The evidence was right there for him to see, or rather hear. The original story ends there, but it's easy to extrapolate from this point. Gopal obviously won his Guru's respect and got a pretty solid scholarship to go study further and become a great scholar. Gopal and Mamta finally managed to climb above the poverty line. And as Gopal became older, he realized how lucky he had been to have the watchful presence of Lord Krishna himself to protect him. The Guru didn't get a darshan of Krishna, but he did get that container that was always full of dahi. So his family never needed to put dahi on the grocery shopping list ever again. The Guru had also been largely rational before this. Now he started mixing spirituality into his lessons, with some mixed results for everyone he taught. A few notes. Mamta is a word that means motherly love. Gopal is actually one of Krishna's many names. It literally means the one who minds cows. And that was what Krishna did as he was growing up. This story is a folktale from Bengal. It was popularized by inclusion in a collection of stories by Sister Nivedita. Sister Nivedita was a disciple of Swami Vivekananda. Despite being an Irish woman, she ended up being a champion of India. We'll probably cover her story at some point in a future episode, and probably cover Swami Vivekananda's story as well. We have done several other folk tales from Bengal before. Check them out on the site sfipodcast.com. Next time, we'll do a story about a little boy challenging the god of death, Yam. It starts with the little boy challenging tradition and ends with him unlocking some pretty secret knowledge that no one else could have known, other than Death himself. If you have comments or suggestions, or if there are particular stories that you would like to hear, please do let me know by leaving a comment or a review on the site sfipodcast.com or tweet at sfipodcast. You can also find me on Instagram or Facebook. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get notified automatically of new episodes. A big thank you to each and every one of you for your continued support and your feedback. The music is from purpleplanet.com. That's purple-planet.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.